Welcome to another episode of Large Learning, where we embark with you on a journey into the impact and potential of AI in education and creativity. I'm Cade Greenland, and as always, I'm joined in this episode by my esteemed co-host and principal of Westbourne Grammar School, Adrian Cam. In this episode, you're going to join us in a discussion with none other than Lauren Sayer, who, in her role as Director of Curriculum at the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority, is instrumental in understanding and integrating AI tools like ChatGPT into the educational framework, and also exploring how it will play a role in the lives of young people. We discuss a wide range of things, from the democratization of information, the importance of equitable access to this technology, and also delve into the challenges and opportunities AI presents in the educational landscape. So without further ado, let's get started.
I've heard you talk about it in the past, Lauren, in terms of relating it to when search first became a thing, you know, probably in the early 2000s with Google, you know, coming onto the scene. Do you want to talk to us about what you think is the comparison there between ChatGPT and Google?
I think the big bit around it is they were disruptive innovations in the technological landscape. And with that, things changed from where they were. And I think, and ironically in that space, and we can go down this area, is I think the other bit is I don't think we've learnt our lessons from when that happened in that space. But I think when Google came on, all of a sudden it began to a degree to democratize search in the technological landscape. So before you had to use pretty specific tools to be able to do it. And now you could just, ask a simple question and get a ranked answer a lot easier than you used to be able to. You used to have had to have a strong sort of knowledge of how things are categorized on the internet. Google changed this landscape. And I think now we're in a similar space where it's democratized the bar to get information's dropped again. And I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes in that space, because one of the issues with it is Google started off really advertising it as a search engine, and it was seen that, but then we saw a change of moving into Google AdWords, and all of a sudden what you got was ranked according to different things. We saw whole new careers such as search engine optimization. So how do you get your ranking right up the top? We're in this new space of AI and large language models where that's seen as an area that is a bit better in that space of, well, it's giving you things not according to your AdWords, it's giving it in terms of ranking the probability of what's the next right thing in this space. However, we also know the reality that companies need to make money. And so it's making sure that we sort of see what happened there. But I think they both started in that same space of being something that lowered the bar for access and made it easier to find things.
We were speaking with Tegan and Liam from Westbourne Grammar in another episode around this very point, that the bursting of Google onto the scene in terms of the ease of search and unlocking the way that we interact with the internet, find information on the internet, was this huge moment in our relationship to information and technology. But over time, I guess we've been trained in a certain way to interact with that tool that starts to be more about optimizing our ability to see ads or to see the highest paying click first, rather than truly, pure knowledge seeking. And we've been trained in that way, and I feel like we've got this moment with especially chat AI tools, that it is very open and very fresh and new and exciting, but already you can imagine, or you can even see how the commercial element to it will become a very strong part of our behavior and interaction with that technology. How do you see because you mentioned earlier, we might not have learned the lessons from the disruption of Google and search and that last wave of technological disruption. What are the things that we need to look out for in this next wave, this next kind of big moment of disruption? Probably one of the biggest waves of disruption in technology.
I think it's around this, in my role at the VCAA, we talk about access to the curriculum and being supported in your learning. I don't think it's any different in this space. I think we have to learn from the lessons. We have to make sure that there's an access and equity to learning how to use this tool appropriately, and that we also don't leave anyone behind. So I've worked in, improving digital capacity of teachers for most of my career. We get it wrong a lot better than we've ever got it right. We leave people behind all the time. You just have to go and have a pretty good chat to most teachers of would they be interested in improving their Microsoft Office skills. All of a sudden you get every teacher going, yes, because I've never really been shown best practice. I've learned along the way and I'm okay, but I've never really learned how to truly use this tool to increase my productivity. It's been said, if you're a certain age or things like that, it's assumed knowledge. And all the way through, we assume this until the gap just gets wider and wider in digital spaces. And I think we're at the bottom rung at the moment. We've got a real opportunity to make sure that we bring everyone along and we build our skills together. And that's really critical in this space, because I think once this technology disrupts to the point that it will, I went and saw Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, the other week. We're all going to become more productive. So what we do will be at a higher level. If you don't know how to use that, all of a sudden your productivity and your worth in the employment sector is going to put you at a real disadvantage. And we've got to be really good at making sure that everybody has access to the learning, and it's not a has not. And I think it's been really good, and it's podcasts like what you're doing right now of making the information free and available for everyone, not just the select few. And I think, congratulations on that, because I think so often these conversations happen within your school walls, but we've got many teachers across Australia and the world that might not have access to these discussions.
Yeah, it's great, Lauren. It's really interesting the work we are doing here at Westbourne in terms of really having the dialogue and engaging critically in the conversation, and actually looking at ways that these sorts of things can enhance the experience for both teachers and students. And I think that's actually vital, and it probably goes back to your comment around equity. And is the Victorian government education system stance still to ban things like ChatGPT at this point in time?
It's not currently banned in Victoria. It was halted, and I suppose I work for a cross-sectoral regulator, not for the department. But what we're looking at in that space is supporting schools and their autonomy in it. And I think we're quite lucky in Victoria to have that. We had a brief pause where government schools banned it. And look, in fairness, as a digital person that has also had to report to risk committees in schools, I actually could see why. We had to make sure that everything was safe, and we had some policies around it. At that stage, back in January and February, the minimum age was 18. Most of our school children weren't 18. I actually didn't think it was a poor decision, because the risk if it was done wrong, and I think we always look at it of, yes, the ban made the paper. If a child was put at risk because we didn't have some sort of safety in place, the fallout for that for the student and for the system is a lot bigger. So I don't mind walking in the right direction. And I think that's what we're doing. I don't want to run too fast because it changes. I ran a webinar series in February, March. It's redundant now.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I think what we're trying to achieve on many different levels is to really look at ways that AI tools, and of course, when we talk about AI, and I'm sure you'll agree with me here, Lauren, it's a very broad umbrella term, and there's so much that sits underneath that term. But it's easier just to label it AI as one thing. But I think,
Yeah.
looking at ways to really elevate the conversation and look at more sophisticated approaches rather than what seems to be the entry conversation into these things in schools, which is around, how do we prevent plagiarism, or how are we going to ensure young people still learn how to write an essay, and all those sorts of things. What's some of the more interesting examples that you've come across in recent times that schools, that teachers, that young people are using AI for?
I think the biggest one is actually not during school hours, it's at home. And this is an amazing one for teachers, but also for students. So being able to go home and have something to bounce off. Tutors are the realm of wealthy parents. And what we now have is an opportunity for tutoring in that space. And where I've seen it work well with schools is, obviously, we know in this space here, it's only as good as the prompt. So we're asking in that space. So there's a few schools that are actually giving some prompts to students as homework to be able to show through their working out and get answers in a tutor format versus just giving a bunch of questions and saying, work out the answer. And I think it's smarter ways of doing the same thing, where they're saying, work with ChatGPT and do this and get the answers, and then ask the following question and go through. So being able to show the process of, I think, intellectual inquiry using a tool is one of the really clever ways I've seen that for students. For teachers, it's the same, where I think teachers during the day from, I'll say 8 till 5, I won't say till, in that space, are working constantly. The reality for a lot of teachers is we're planning at night. When we're planning at night, we no longer have the great staff room of people that we can bounce ideas off. Being able to look in that space has been another one. But I think where schools are doing it quite cleverly in that space is actually saying, okay, we'd like to refine this piece of work and create a differentiated sequence. What's the prompt we're going to use to do that? And are we going to include some demographic information? Are we going to include what levels we might want it done? So I think that's a really exciting space where I'm seeing it. And then I think I'm seeing the workload. So I think there's the learning aspect, and then the increasing productivity aspect of it as well, of seeing schools that are using it to ensure that comments are aligned with achievement standards and we've got a coherence in the mark versus the message. And I think that's always been something in schools that I'm sure, Adrian, you've proofed as many reports as I have. Does the number match the words and the narrative? And actually having tools that do that, but then suggest an improvement is really, really exciting in this space. And I think the other area is around identifying gaps in knowledge. And this is a prompt I've seen teachers use with students. It's really where a student will say, here's my answer, and work backwards and go, what are the questions that sit, or do I have any gaps in my knowledge that I should really know about? And actually building that breadth and depth that we sometimes don't get in the classroom every day. We aim to deliver what we can do in the classroom, but being able to then encourage students to go, is there anything else I should know in this space? And doing what we're sort of doing, going down that rabbit hole of learning and discussion in that space is critically exciting and important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think what you're describing is I think this idea that we'll eventually get to in the coming years around the convergence of different platforms potentially into a personal AI, that we'll carry around in our pockets, very similar to a mobile phone potentially, or it'll be integrated into the phone ecosystem or something like that. And I think that's a really exciting prospect. And coming back to equity and really leveling the playing field, I think that creates a really, it does democratize that idea around social class and enables everyone to have an assistant, a tutor in schools in their pocket.
It does right now, and let's be really honest, as long as we're a Western civilization, the opportunity for it in the future in other areas, I think that's one of the other areas that, of a challenge is the cultural bias that can sometimes sit in such a model, and its preference to English at the moment.
Can we talk about that? Because there was a great question in that Sam Altman forum that someone, an Aussie, got up and said, "Can we have ChatGPT?"
Yes.
Acknowledging our way of dating, our that dating sequence that we do day, month, and year, and that nowhere else except for America does month, day, year. But that's this bias that's inbuilt into this platform, and that's even like the most kind of benign example of bias. But the idea of bias being inbuilt into the LLM, the large language model, is something that's really important in this technology. How do you see the challenges, see the I guess how we can overcome inherent bias in this technology as we kind of start to embrace it and integrate it into curriculum and learning?
It's been a really long time that teachers and the whole education system have spoken about we need to have knowledge, but we need to be able to ask the right questions as well. So, in education, we need knowledge and we need a base understanding, but we need to know what are the right questions to ask. And one of the interesting questions in this bias space is actually working with students in, I suppose, the capabilities aspect of the curriculum of critical and creative thinking, and being able to say to a large language model, after you've got an answer, can you explain what biases might be in this answer? That changes it again, because it's not a search engine, it's a large language model. It can't lie in that regard. It will just then say, oh, well, it was built off my database of this, but you might want to think of the following biases. And that's been a really interesting space in large language model that you don't necessarily have in other Gen AI around Midjourney. You can't say to Midjourney, what is, when you made this image, what was the database? But you can with ChatGPT and Bard and, the associated ones. You can actually say, so on this, what are the biases that I need to be aware of? But it's teaching students to ask that next question. And it's back with the tutoring and all of this. It's actually this new skill set of, in order to be a critical and creative thinker, and in order to make sure I have strong intercultural understanding of different things, I have to ask the right questions to develop that new knowledge.
It's about seeing things from different perspectives, isn't it? So, making sure that we're seeing things holistically rather than through a very narrow lens.
And Sam Altman spoke about what the future might look in that space when he came to Melbourne. It was really interesting, where he said his hope for the future is that you can ask for a discussion around a hot political topic, and it will give you a perspective from America, but it might give you a perspective from Japan or from China, and actually moving from just one answer to being a culturally responsive answer. And it's really exciting because you don't get that at the moment with Google at all, or mainstream media in that space. You hear whatever the prevalent value is in your country. But as we know, things are different.
One of the pressing challenges of First Nations culture is the preservation of languages. And, we've got this incredible opportunity within our First Nations people to, I guess, not capture and preserve, but explore and develop large language models around First Nations languages that are able to, I guess, make them more relevant and make them more, I guess, elevate them in terms of how we can interact with them. And this idea of building these discrete large language models across different cultures, different industries, ecosystems is something that I'm really excited about. I've talked about it in the past around my industry of film and TV, and having the ability to explore different genres or different disciplines within that, using very specific, very kind of deep large language models or algorithms that are for that use case. And I think at the moment we're at a very generalized, broad application of the technology, but as it evolves, it's going to get more sophisticated in the different ways that it's applied. Is there anything in your world and that you've come across, Lauren, that's exciting you in that respect?
I think it's the move to being able to go from one large language model that rules them all to more bespoke ones. And I think that's a really exciting place for teachers of your ability. I think what we've seen for so many years is the siloing of not just subjects. I think that's teachers can fix that bit through conversation, but the siloing of I have to go to one site for my lesson plans, but another site for my curriculum, another site for my assessment. And if I want support for reporting, and that's not how a day in a teacher's world works. Everything's happening all at once, but your ability to start to have an educational large language model that will provide support for teachers in that integrated, holistic way that they work is really exciting, because all of a sudden I can say, here's the profile of my class and my students. Here's what I'm working on. I have some well-being problems over here that I really need some support on. I'd like some support in the lesson plans, then some assessment, and then how do I go about reporting that back and providing feedback? All of a sudden, you've got basically what can take, if that was a problem of practice for a teacher today, that's a couple of days of work to problem solve that okay, because you'd go and ask opinions, and again, back to that democracy thing, and it would be who you'd have a relationship with. And if I'm new to a school, I might not have a mentor, or how that works. Your ability to get that in a space, and I think we talk about students having a tutor in their pocket, the opportunities for teachers to have a high quality professional mentor in their pocket is just as exciting in this space, where we're sometimes too scared to ask the questions to someone, because, learning for most of us is so relational. And what we can do in this space is develop the relationships to ensure learning happens in more than just those relational spaces. And I think that's where we'll start to see huge changes, because we all know at the moment the teacher gives the high impact in terms of an effect size of improvement. It'll be interesting to see how that works in the future, where we have the teacher doing what they do best in that relational, but we're also going to have another option around further support in other areas, where sometimes for some students at the moment, they'll go home and they don't have access to anyone. Two parents are working, there might not be anyone home, they're cooking their dinner, they're doing all of this. But now all of a sudden we could have someone to support along the way, but with everything, whether it's getting the recipe for whatever's in the fridge to our homework. And recipes are a great space for ChatGPT, I will say.
Yeah. We're putting all of the ingredients that we had in the fridge and going, what do I do for a week? Make me a recipe plan.
Yeah.
Lauren, I saw you were reading Peter Diamandis' book, The Future is Faster Than You Think, and I know from, he's done some work in various spaces over a number of years, particularly with the Singularity University and Ray Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil thinks we'll hit the singularity in the year 2037, and there's no turning back from that point. I'm sure you're familiar with his work, and so it's like, where do you see? You've always been an early adopter with technology, and you've always been at the forefront of different, platforms, whether it be social media, whether it be coding, whether it be pedagogical approaches. Where do you see this stopping?
Well, I think on the singularity bit, I think we've been really good at this. You just have to go back and watch the Jetsons. And I'm going right back, right? To realise that, we're not running around in our flying cars, and we can't, and damn it, we can't, because traffic's appalling. But we're at this space where I think we do dream big, but I think it's this tale of technology. So where we'll end up, for some of us, might be in one spot, but for all of us is in a very different spot. So we just have to look at other areas that have done this, where, Wolfram Alpha was going to change the scene of mathematics. it's become an area quite niche for people. Not every person's using Wolfram every day. So I think where we're going to end up in here is that it's changed the game in terms of being able to have that assistant and that space. I think what we'll see is this will get better and better. But I think the important part of that is right now, that generative AI, which is generating from what we have and what we're developing, I think the future will be that it will self-generate and we'll move into that area. And I think we'll have that. But what that requires is us as a species on Earth is that we have to make sure that we also have, rules, regulations, and safeguards in this space, because I think that's an area. I think everything's moving and the rate of change is becoming faster, but how we manage that to make sure that it doesn't go wrong is also something that's quite pertinent to me, because I think we've seen, if I don't talk about, I suppose, Google and web, we've seen great technology in a historical capacity go wrong in wartime before. And I think we've got to make sure that we don't forget that now it's a computer and not a bomb or something, or nuclear. We need to still go, well, the risks are real and present. And so we will get there. But with that, please, let's hope that we learn a few more lessons along the way, and not just from tech, from all of the past.
How do we start? What's the first, how do we begin to address, to control, to, at least come to terms?
I think firstly, these are the wicked questions we want to ask, and we want to ask them with everyone. And I think the first thing we do is start to have these discussions. I think the second part about it is we have to look at technology in the same way we look at global laws and treaties and policies across everywhere. It's not. So, we have peace treaties and different information. We have the United Nations. We have a safety network where we agree as, predominantly a group of civilizations right across the world. We agree that these are the things that we want to protect. And I think that's where we have to start. And I'm not sure this discussion's happening as fast as it should be, because we've now got large language model as far as the technology on the web. It's open source. If you're clever enough, you can make your own. Now, I don't hang around in the dark web, but the next step will be a large language model of all the information that we don't want out there. And, that's where we have to make sure that we have safety capacities in there to make sure that this doesn't keep happening. We've got to have that so it reflects the world, not just us in Australia.
It's a really interesting time, Lauren, because a lot of the AI tools at the moment have reached a point where, they are becoming more useful for us because the amount of data that's available to train them is growing exponentially. So, and so these tools are becoming more sophisticated because they've got more data that they can learn from, and so on and so forth. But I think the other interesting space is some of those AI tools that don't need data to learn, like they learn through trial and error. And I'm thinking a very specific case is when I think it was AlphaGo Zero was trained to beat the world's best StarCraft players in esports. And that was, it's
I love these references. You're just a grab bag of like we were talking about Go the other day, and now we're talking about StarCraft. Yeah, I love it.
The simple premise was that it basically let it loose in the game, and it learnt how to play the game by playing against itself. And I think they let it loose for about 72 hours or so, it was a very short period of time. It was a matter of days. And then within that short time frame, it became better than the world's best StarCraft players. So I think, that's where I think it gets really scary, because, and then you start talking, well, how do you regulate something like that?
I think it's the discussion that we need to have. And whilst I'm relatively new to the VCAA, I'm 11 weeks out of being in a classroom, and the students are asking the questions of, will my skill set be replaced by AI? And I think what you're saying there is a fear that I've heard young people talk about of, what does the future of work look like for me? And we're already seeing it's not as stable as it was. And instead of one job, you might have 8, and how this works. And I think where it sits with AI is that you start to have people who are good at it and then move forward. But for our general people, what does that mean for their jobs and roles? And we saw this with the Industrial Revolution. We saw this revolution of, jobs changed and people and our modes and our world of work changed. I think we're going to have a similar thing, because different jobs will be exactly what you said, Adrian. They'll be replaced because, something does it better than you. What I think is with that is, as an education group of, we have to be agile in this space and prepare students for different areas, but also look at what are the amazing things that make us human. You only have to jump on the phone to one of the many power companies or banks to realize how much you prefer to speak to a human than a machine. And frustrating it is to go through those systems. But there are certain things in our life where we have a human preference for engaging with other humans. So how do we build on that and go from whatever the next revolution is almost that human-centered revolution of humans do those things that they do best, and we let machines do the other bits, knowing that they can't do our parts, because that is the bit is, I think the amazing thing, ChatGPT, you ask a question and it doesn't have empathy, and it will just give you the information, and it's making sure that we remember that and reinforce it, because that's where we'll see that exciting bit. But it's scary because it can do things better. It improves your writing, it does things, but it also allows you to work at a higher level as well. So I think that's it. But Sam Altman said it the other day, and it stuck with me. Humans are very, very good at creating new problems to solve.
Yeah.
We are. So we'll have new problems that need solving and new employment industries. And I did think about that was, as we get more answers, we're just going to have more questions.
Is it the end of the current set of wicked problems that we're facing? Wicked problems being those ones that are so complex and interrelated that you solve one bit and a new problem set kind of arise, and things like climate change, homelessness, hunger, income inequality, all these kind of really curly, multifaceted problems. Are we at the end of some of those?
Look, I'm not a tech positively or a tech evangelist. I don't think we are. I know I've heard it from big people of, this will solve world hunger and this will do this and this will do that. I'm not there. I'm cynical in that space, because I think so many aspects of those problems are deeply human-centered in terms of belief systems and power. It's not as simple as just zapping up some more food in a
technology. It's not a
model.
Yeah.
One of the smaller problems, Lauren, that I'm really interested in is this: what everything I'm seeing with these large language models, particularly around the programming and coding space, is that the rate at which that side of this technology is advancing is extraordinary, and it's actually threatening, I think, the whole coding programming industry, perhaps more than any other, I would have thought. And of course that's we could argue that until the cows come home. But 10 years ago in schools, everyone needs to learn how to code. And I think I'm passionate about students understanding technology from the inside out and making sure they have agency over the machine. So does everyone still need to learn how to code, or do we need to move beyond that and say, okay, well, no, everyone actually needs to learn how to make their own AI?
No, and this is at the heart of, I think, the challenge is around the curriculum. A fantastic curriculum doesn't talk about the tool. And I think even though, and the messaging of what the curriculum is and aims to deliver versus what sometimes the messages come out on the other end are really interesting. So we've got the message in schools that everybody needs to learn how to code. If you actually look at the curriculum, it talks about separating things according to digital systems, data and information, and digital solutions. Now, in hindsight, that was incredibly clever because it's not talking about you need to code to do that. It's about, well, how do we manage digital systems, data and information, and digital solutions? And this is the trick of making sure that we future proof our curriculum and we don't suddenly do exactly what you just said, which is, oh, let's develop a curriculum about AI. We need to create curriculums that solve problems and support a knowledge base for people to do different things. But it's not a tool that we will have where that is there. It might be an area of specialisation, but from a broad-based perspective in our schooling, we should be really wary of this, of going, oh, all of a sudden, I'm going to create a new elective called AI, and we're going to learn how to what. But we laugh, but we've seen it in schools and we're seeing it overseas of such and such has launched their amazing new area. We need to get back and go, well, what is the underpinning principles that we want people to know about? So I think students need to understand about how digital systems work, how data and information works in different contexts, and what are digital solutions that they can use. So we teach everyone to code, and all of a sudden we teach everyone Python. Python doesn't exist anymore, and we move forward versus understanding the fundamentals of how coding works is the sweet spot for me, because then you start to understand how a large language model's developed. But also, if you want to make a video game, you can do that in Python because you understand the steps. And that's that bit where I think we'll become multilingual fast in that space. So I don't think we need to learn how to code. We need to know the principles of coding.
Yeah, I love that. So it's around computational thinking, and it's starting from the premise of what problems are we trying to solve, or what are we trying to do, rather than everyone needs to learn the syntax of Python.
Everybody learned, it was sort of like, well, you learned Scratch and then you moved from Scratch and you did this step and this step. And we had this sort of lockstep model in schools of teaching students how to do coding. I'd be really interested if the majority of students, what they took away from that in terms of what you just said, Adrian, of what is the computational thinking and how I organise instructions in that sequence to get an outcome. You know, that'd be a great assumption to test, because I think it's this focus on actually, well, what is the thinking required is more important than if I look at Scratch, putting my blocks together and getting a cat dance from one side to the screen or the other, because for students, that was sort of the outcome, not the thinking.
Yeah. And I think there was so much potential in Scratch, and I think it served a purpose at a point in time. But I think those schools that are still, doing Scratch, I think the kids are sick of it, to be honest, and they're like, "Oh, Scratch! We have to do another project in Scratch." But I think what you're saying, I think that computational thinking, that sequencing of ideas to achieve an outcome, is that concept of almost writing pseudocode, to then, once you've got the logic in place behind what you're trying to achieve, well, then you can use a tool like ChatGPT to produce the program or the code for you.
Yeah, and you've got that transferable skill, the same as ChatGPT. If I've put something in, or even like, let's go to Google Translate, can give me something in another language. We'll start to see that with coding, so that if it's in C#, it could be put into Python, or but the underpinning principles of what you're trying to solve, that's the important bit, not the actual code. Because now my husband's a dev, and he debugs code so much faster now with AI than he ever did. He's much more productive, but it's the problem solving aspect of his job to build the integration that's still incredibly important, because you've got to identify the problem and work out the solution. It's not just develop the code.
Yeah,
You said wicked questions before, which I really loved. Something it's like, what are those the tough questions that we need to be asking now? Because that becomes the more important thing. It strikes me that we've moved from, in terms of learning, going from facts and figures and the talk and talk model, when you have to memorize dates, and then all of a sudden this tool came along that we had all the information we need at our fingertips. Where are we now in terms of transferring into the next epoch of learning and education, where we've been talking recently about empowering the learner and doing self-inquiry and being mentors in that journey as educators or business leaders. Where do we go now? What is the next mode of learning that we need to skill up on or be ready for to be able to work in concert with this technology?
I think I want to pick up on the first bit you said of, well, now we've got all the information at our fingertips, so we don't need knowledge and facts anymore. I'll challenge that, because I think we do. And I think we all need a basis of knowledge, and this is so that we can ask the right questions, so that when we get all of the information, we can disseminate it into that. And I think it's this bit that we seem to forget of the aim of a knowledge-based curriculum is understanding. It's not more knowledge. And this is the bit of, so we know more facts and figures now, but they're at our fingertips, but the step to understanding requires an underpinning basis of knowledge to be able to do that. And I think this is this bit of moving forward. I think the capabilities in our curriculum, both Victorian and Australian, of critical and creative and ethical capabilities, intercultural capabilities, these will become more and more important, because they will not just be in one area, they're across all of the areas, and we need to use them every day. If you look at what we've been chatting about in this space of how we're working, we're saying, oh gosh, let's worry about big wicked problems here. We're worried about bias. Well, they're intercultural issues. We've sat here and gone, we're really worried about ethics and we're worried about this. Well, that's ethical understanding. And we've said, well, we want people to do questioning and understand that really wicked problem area. That is our critical and creative thinking. So these capabilities that are in our curriculum, I think future-proof things. I really do. And schools, when they're mapping, need to make sure that they look at that and say, well, how are we doing these areas? And the other one is that personal and social capability that we have in those 4 capabilities is, well, what's my role as a learner and how I work? So I think we are well placed to address it, but we have to remember that we have curriculum areas of learning areas or disciplines, but we have these amazing capabilities in our curriculum that we need to make sure that, I think for years they've sort of been sitting in the corner going, remember me, I'm ethical capability, to be somewhere in your curriculum. I think the impetus for that will become more and more important, because they're the skills that you're going to have to demonstrate in this emerging area.
Going back to one of the things that you said earlier, Lauren, around, ChatGPT currently doesn't really have empathy. Like, you can tell it to be empathetic and it will simulate empathy.
It's great for emails.
Yeah, right. But as this technology continues to evolve and become more sophisticated, I think AI, ChatGPT might not be the tool that we're talking about in years to come. It might be something different. But I think these tools are going to increase their abilities to be able to simulate a wide range of what we used to call humanness or human emotions. How is our relationship with technology going to change at that point in time?
I think it'll depend on the people, and I think that of how we work. Some people are striving for singularity all the time. There's a whole group of people out there that would love nothing more. But there's a whole group. I find it interesting talking to young people at the moment. I don't know whether you have this at your school, Adrian, but students that have gone from having a smartphone to going right back to like a Nokia phone that just texts. and does things. And young people who are not on social media at all, I've seen this increasingly of young people asking their parents not to post photos of them on Facebook. They want to control their profile and who they are in a human world in this space. And I think this is an area in this part of it of there are an emerging group of young people, and I think other people in other generations, that want to define themselves separate from technology. And we have to admire and respect and provide space in our world for this as well, because we're not defined. Sometimes I thought I was defined by, I met my husband on Twitter. I was, my whole life was in 140 characters. But you, but you do have this space where you look at, well, who are you? And now there's these concepts of digital detoxes and things like this. So I think whilst we will get more of being defined in technology, we'll also work out where the boundaries are for us. And they may be what I've seen and, of old school phones and doing that and stepping right back, but it might be around a balance of where are my boundaries and how do I develop my persona. And I think the challenge for humans here is making sure that there's congruence with who you are. And it's always been the case. Who I am online and who I am in person, in a lot of cases for young people, is something that they really struggle with, because you can be anyone. You've got filters that make you look like a Kardashian. Life's great, but then we have to live with ourselves in this space as well. So I think we'll have more discussions around who we are here and who we are there and what are the differences, because that's that tricky bit for us as humans. Is it can feel like and sound like you online, and we see that with virtual reality and how this works, but we're still getting back into this space.
My dream is that we get rid of this as the interface to the digital world, in that we don't have this relationship with a screen, or let alone a keyboard and a screen, but that it's much more integrated into our real experience. And having doing a lot of work in Web3 in the metaverse space, the impact on my mental health as well as mental capacity has been stretched, because you're constantly switching between these two personas and living in this ambiguous zone. And we've got several kind of decentralized organizations of people that we work with, and that's a completely different style of interaction, but it's all faced through a phone or a computer screen. And I think the promise of more immersive technology is that we get to bring that into our real space a lot more, and have that idea of digital twins overlay to our physical world, which is exciting. It's obviously some precautions that we have to take to look out for that. But I think that's the future that I'm really excited for, is that we lose this idea of a screen being our point of access to the digital space.
And I think it's as long as we work out where those boundaries are, because we see young people struggling at the moment with just a screen in terms of what's real, what's not. What is the perception on Instagram for young women and eating disorders, or in this area? As it becomes more immersive, we just need to make sure we have the safeguards as well, because I think, I worked in a hospital school for a significant amount of time, and the effect on media and how that works, as it gets better and more integrated, we have to make sure that we understand that possibly, we need to accept the fact that our human brain deals with information and images differently to the way the machine does. We have an inference that's based on our background, our chemical composition, and how that works. So how we interface with technologies as humans is different to how technology interfaces with technology. So I just think it's going to be amazing, but we have to make sure that it's that human-centered area with the right safeguards, because some of us are going to become very vulnerable. And I think young people need to make sure we do have a duty to protect young people in that space.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Lauren. And I know we're almost out of time, so perhaps we have this as the last question, because I'm very conscious of how generous you've been with your time. I think the tension, you're an active individual online, and you always have been as long as I've known you. You're involved in forums. You're on social media. You're doing podcasts. You got videos online. You've got you're online. You're findable. You're searchable. There is a lot of data about you online.
Yeah.
And
I know it.
But I wonder how in light of what you've just said about students, and there's a rising group of young people who are perhaps shying away from digital and wanting to be very careful about the amount of data that's available on them and to be able to curate that very specifically. How do you feel about that? And how do you navigate that tension, knowing that there's so much information about you out there? Is that something that's on your mind at all?
It never used to be, and it is more and more, I think, because I think that, when you're a young teacher, you sort of were out there going, oh, well, you're trying to make your mark and you're putting information up and sharing, and then people will attack you and you try and defend, and you end up in this space. But I think I'm more and more, because I think you realize that the more you have online, the more influence and that people look for your opinion. And I think with that, there becomes a responsibility to make sure that you're thoughtful in what you do. The concern I have with students, and look, I might be asking, you may have been absolutely angelic, Adrian, in your formative years, but I probably wasn't. And I got to go through schoolies, my high school years. I got to go through my whole schooling without someone videoing my mistakes that would be up on the internet forever. That, and to this day, I don't care that I'm, sometimes I struggle with the fact that I'm getting older, but that part of my life, that's just a huge gift that I got to grow up without that, even the trust aspect. I grew up in an era when my mum said, when the street lights go on, you've got to be back at your house, Lauren. And I'm like, oh yeah, but I could have been anywhere and no one knew where I was. But now parents, if they don't have a phone or a watch, it's an AirTag in a bag, or, young people are under this constant scrutiny, and
Valence.
one of two things has to happen here, and neither of them have happened yet. Either we have to draw back on the surveillance, which I don't think is going to happen, or the other bit's the one that we're going to have to do is start to accept that humans make mistakes and have formative years, and we forgive them and accept and move on. But you just have to look, even in mainstream media, of, photos of AFL footballers that have been up and online but at some stage we're going to have to say, or you look at, where people will pull up a photo that is now seen as cultural appropriation, but 10 years ago was considered a community. Okay, I think we've got to start to have the discussion around, if we're filming everything, when do you get those formative second chances, third chances, and learning experiences? Because that's the bit that worries me with young people is, I grew up, and the worst outcome from my mistake might have been that, lost a bit of money. I'm not, I've done something. I never broke the law or anything like that. But if the worst was that it wasn't that there was a video online of me at a party, singing a song that's now no longer appropriate, that gets brought up every time I go for a job. And that's the reality for our young people right now. I think that's unfair. We know about learning and development. We know that young people's brains develop over time, but the current technological landscape doesn't allow for that to happen. And as humans, we're not forgiving in that space. We don't say, oh, well, you were 16, and you see it on the news when there's young people in trouble. No one ever says, oh, well, they're 16. What you now hear is, well, they're old enough to do better, throw the book at them. And we have to work out where our balances are here, because students have to be able to find safe spaces to make mistakes. And look, maybe that's the wicked problem, is how we support that in schools.
That's a whole other episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Lauren. Lots of food for thought there. I always enjoy our chats, and they always take us in directions that perhaps are a little different to where we started. But I love that, and I think we could pick up on that conversation enough.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Well,
right.
I might wrap up then. Kind of more formally, this has been Future Ready Education. It's a podcast where we explore AI as it applies to education and the broader work landscape, and how we're facing it as professionals and educators and leaders in our community. It's been wonderful having you on board, Lauren, for this episode, and I can't wait to do round 2.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Large Learning. As we continue to navigate this transformative era, it's essential for educators, parents and learners to be informed and engaged in the conversation. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on our next episodes. The journey of understanding AI's role in education is ongoing, and we're here to explore it with you every step of the way. Until next time, thanks for listening.